I'm being real in that aspect of just as how I'm, you can be somewhat critical of, not critical, but diminish a little bit of how much that emphasis we place on, like, a lot of lefties say like FDR was the greatest president or one of the top three. Same thing applies there. Just to be fair in that analysis, you know what I mean? But still, like I said, at the end of the day, what matters to me more and what would make me have a more shining opinion of Biden is things that I've talked about a lot on this podcast in the past. It's great to say those things when you're addressing Congress. Like, hey, he laid out, like, universal pre-K, a ton of great things that we should have been doing to catch up to the rest of the world a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And I give him credit for bringing them up. But again, let's not forget, like, he's not, or at least he's not letting us know if he's doing it, which would be the wrong strategy, but he's not leaning on the right people who need to be leaned on right now. So, like, all of this talk about all these grand plans that we have, that's all good and great, but at the end of the day, functionally, when it comes to votes in the House and the Senate, there still isn't any real path to those things that he's talking about. Because again, everything can't be reconciliation, guys. Right. Everything can't. Let's not forget that. It can't be. So, let's just keep it super real in that regard.
Something to note as well, though, is I believe in his 100 days, he spent more than what FDR, 6 trillion is what he spent so far. And I guess the danger that people will send up signals about is, I guess that's something like 10% of the GDP, and we've had this conversation before. Will there be some sort of residual effect from spending like that? And I honestly don't think there will be.
No.
For reasons that we've discussed, and how it's kind of a false marker.
We should probably cover modern monetary theory on the podcast at some point.
John Oliver had a great breakdown of it. If anybody kind of wants to get my opinion on when we talk about GDP. Mm-hmm. So he spent 6 trillion already, which I think he could have spent more, and that's just my politics, I guess. But it's not a massive progressive overhaul like a lot of people on the right are saying. It's just spending that's needed, and at the end of the day, someone like Joe Biden, if he is the uniter-in-chief and he wants to get legislation passed, they better make sure that they don't lose a branch of Congress. Right. Because you got the midterms coming up. I just saw that a lady in Illinois, a congresswoman in Illinois, I don't know her name offhand, she said she's not going to run again, and this was a Trump district. Okay. So that's an opportunity for them to claw back and get closer to that threshold and getting control of the House. That will be the end of his legislative agenda.
Here's my thing, though, right? Like, so if you saw that census data that came out, a ton of Rust Belt states lost a representative in the House. New York lost one, California lost one, I believe, and some southern states gained. Texas gained, Florida gained. And the thing that's important here is that we don't know for sure how that's going to break down. What district is going to get absorbed, or because that's how it's going to work, folks, right? Like. We might cover this story later, just real quick to get through it. The U.S. Census every year is done, and then what that does is they allocate the amount of House seats based off of the population in each state, and basically it was like a 65-35 split of loss between seats between Democrats and Republicans. So here's my take on that. Right now, you have a very slim majority in the House, and if Democrats do take back a bigger majority in the House, I would argue that's actually going to be worse for progressives, because it's that leverage I was talking about before.
Right.
If the Democrats sweep in the House, right, and don't win back the Senate, that's arguably the worst thing that could happen. The Senate should be key. Mm-hmm. If we do end up sweeping the House, that leaves me concerned. If say we have like a 14 or more person majority, that's really threatening, because you only have about a half dozen people in the House who would even be considering doing any of the leverage plays we've talked about a lot in the last few weeks. So that's concerning for me. But again, like, the Senate should be the target. And again, like, the map for this midterm coming up, as far as who's vulnerable, their popularity ratings and everything, the math, Vegas odds are in favor of Republicans. So
yeah, I mean,
we'll see.
Like I said, I wanted to touch on that to start, just because it was something that showed up on every cable channel, and you're talking heads talking about it all week. My personal opinion is, shut up and show me with anything that any president says or any elected official says. I understand that it's about messaging and all that, but
Right.
you know, that's the reality of it all. Is can he get it done? Can he get it done without reconciliation? Is he going to be allowed to spend as much as he's going to say he's going to spend? We'll see. But yeah, that was a quick hit that I wanted to kind of just jump right into for the sake of time.
Yeah.
We're not trying to keep you here for 2-3 hours, even though you know our set looks good, we sound good.
Got some live shots.
Yeah. Do you wanna hop right into India, or you?
Oh yeah, we gotta do Matt Gaetz real quick.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Please do.
man. Okay, so
So hold on. Episode 11 or 10, we did the Matt Gaetz story, which was about 3-4 weeks ago, right?
yeah, I think it was 10. I could be wrong though.
So the reason I say that is because this weasel has managed to hang around still without resigning, and I didn't think he was long for the for government after we did that episode, but lo and behold, he's still around. But Ramon,
But if you tuned into that last episode, we have the perfect next chapter for you folks. And if you haven't, then go back and listen. If you're live streaming, you know, maybe hey, pause it, go back, listen, pick back up here, you know, whatever. But so we got here breaking news last night from the Daily Beast. A confession letter written by Joel Greenberg, and if everyone remembers, that's his boy who he was partying with, ripping off IDs, doing all kind of crazy, just frat boy bullshit.
having a grand old time.
You know, he was the former tax collector. He'd been arrested, was let out of jail, violated his bail, went back to jail, and he is the main target. He was the main target of the DOJ investigation that implicated Matt Gaetz in the first place. So here we go again from the Daily Beast. Confession letter written by Joel Greenberg in the final months of the Trump presidency claims that he and close associate Representative Matt Gaetz paid for sex with multiple women, as well as a girl who was 17 at the time. The letter, which the Daily Beast recently obtained, was written after Greenberg, who was under federal indictment, asked Roger Stone to help him secure a pardon from then President Donald Trump. Okay, and then just real quick, a series of private messages starting late in 2020, also recently obtained by the Daily Beast, shows a number of exchanges between Greenberg and Roger Stone conducted over the encrypted messaging app called Signal, with communications set to disappear. However, Greenberg appears to have taken screenshots of their conversations. So, right here, let's just stop and chat about this, where I love it. The fact that all these dirtbag, like, just straight hatchet men and hucksters and grifters on the right, like, they're constantly, like, it's like with Nixon, like, just, I'm gonna record everyone, I'm gonna have evidence, just in case any of you
to
motherfuckers
incriminate
turn
yourself.
out. Well, right, they do it as, like, having blackmail on other people that they're doing dirt with.
Yeah.
And that's just so, it just shows how dumb these people are. Like, the fact that Roger Stone, which he's turning on Greenberg in this article, we'll get to it, but the fact that Roger Stone, like, was even sending messages back and forth with this guy, it's like, you knew that this was possible, where he was just gonna, like, screenshot it and blow it up, and you were gonna end up in a DOJ investigation. Like, who in their right mind would have some guy texting them over an encrypted app that's meant to be secret, you know, for, like, whatever reason?
These guys would, because they're.
Right. I mean, I used Signal before. I used it when we were organizing protests last
I
time.
used it when I was playing. I mean.
You know, but
Yeah.
but I'm saying, like, it's just, oh man, it's really unbelievable. But you guys know my feeling on Roger Stone, so we'll.
Well, I was waiting for him to make an appearance. Honestly.
We knew he well. We called it.
Hold on, this gives me a chance. You keep talking here.
All right, I'll keep going. Okay, so here, let's keep going through the article, folks. Here's a quote. On more than one, and this is a quote from Greenberg. Quote, on more than one occasion, this individual, talking about the 17-year-old girl, was involved in sexual activities with several of the other girls, the congressman from Florida's 1st Congressional District, and myself. From time to time, gas money, or gifts, rent, or partial tuition payments were made to several of these girls, including the individual who was not yet 18. I did see the acts occur firsthand, and Venmo transactions, Cash App, or other payments were made to these girls on behalf of Congressman Gaetz. Okay. So, again, like, even, this is just more and more stacking on top of this guy's head right now. Like, at this point, they already had the smoking gun of, obviously, Greenberg implicated him in the grand jury for when he was arrested for the sex trafficking. A ton of the women reportedly in the New York Times article that blew this all up already already pointed at Gates that he was involved. So the way I see it right now is the DOJ is just doing their due diligence. Like, they're just waiting. Because here's the thing, right? If you're the DOJ, right? Why would you slap cuffs on this guy now when all of these rats are just running around exposing each other? Like, yeah, go ahead, let him squirm for like a few weeks, a couple months. Like, why not? Maybe he'll do more dumb shit. Like, they're definitely watching him now at this point. Like I referenced before, this is a RICO charge. He could be completely tapped right now if they wanted to. No problem. Because it's a conspiracy charge. They would get a fucking warrant from a judge over the phone for this, no problem. They could tap Matt Gates everything, no issue, on a drop of a dime.
Has there been a response at all from the Gates camp?
Yeah, there was some bullshit fucking statement. He hired an outside PR firm. He's no longer using his people, his internal people from Congress. So that just smells guilt to me.
Right.
But I didn't quote any of it. It was all just bullshit. Where they were basically trying to question the validity of this article that broke. But again, like, folks, they literally printed the letters that Greenberg sent to Roger Stone to give to Trump that were basically confessions for the pardon. Because
that's actually, so here's the interesting thing, right? If you remember Michael Flynn, right? Trump pardoned him. Typically how pardons used to work was there was some admission of guilt before. That's how pardons used to work back in the day. So I don't know if Stone like gassed him up and got him to do that, or if there was some weird thing, but whatever. So here, let's go on real quick.
Yeah.
So we got another quote here. This is the conversations between Greenberg and Roger Stone. Quote, if I give you $250,000 in Bitcoin, would that help? Or is this not a financial matter? Greenberg wrote to Stone. Quote, I understand all of this and have taken it into consideration, Stone replied. I will know more in the next 24 hours. I cannot push too hard because of the nonsense surrounding pardons. Then Stone responds again, quote, I hope you are prepared to wire me $250,000 because I'm feeling confident. In a text message to the Daily Beast, Stone said that Greenberg had tried to hire him to assist with a pardon, but he denied asking for receiving payment or interceding on his behalf. He did, however, confirm he had Greenberg prepare a document explaining his prosecution. So what's crazy here, guys, is again, like, Stone, according to this to these text messages, was asking him to prepare a document explaining his prosecution and what happened, but he completely copped to everything and just like weirdly like wrote a confession letter. So
yeah, that's literally that's my whole take on this whole story. I'm like, you literally signed your confession letter.
Crazy,
unreal. How do you give? What's the over and under? Do you think he's going to last another week?
Gates?
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, what more are you collecting? I don't know what else you've got. And at the end of the day, here, I have the final quote from Greenberg, just the last part of the article. Quote, my lawyers that I fired know the whole story about Matt Gates' involvement, Greenberg wrote to Roger Stone on December 21st. They know he paid me they know that he paid me to pay the girls and that he and I both had sex with the girl who was underage. So again, he writes in that article, these are lawyers who are no longer representing him. They could also be subpoenaed for this DOJ investigation. The web just keeps spiraling of more and more people who know about this and can be corroborative witnesses to this investigation. Just more and more weight stacking on Gates' head. So I don't know. Like at this point, like if he doesn't go to, like if he literally isn't arrested before like June, something weird's happening. You know what I mean? Like if that's my cut. You want to talk about an over under? I would probably say like May 30th. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's got to be it. Like,
well,
there's nothing else to gather anymore.
They also think they can probably sink their teeth into maybe get more if they don't. That's the only explanation. If he's not arrested or indicted by June, then they must feel like they have a bigger fish beyond him.
But who? Stone?
I mean,
Stone is bigger than Gates.
Yeah, and he's involved, obviously.
Well, I was going to say, like, he did just escape prior prosecution.
Yeah, by using the pardon.
Exactly. And the insurrection, that also happened. So, like, he was heavily involved. So, I don't know.
What a cesspool.
Maybe he's the big fish. I don't know.
What a cesspool.
Interesting. I just find it amazing. And, in my opinion, like, I don't know. Like, I don't think it's Biden, like, playing. I don't think he, like, even knows who. I'm sure he knows who Roger Stone is, but I'm sure he doesn't care. But I just get Gates out of there. You can't have a congressman with this type of evidence hanging out. Like, and it's crazy, right, folks? Like, this is the type of shit like we would roll in like another country and be like, oh, your president was involved in something crazy or someone in your Congress, so we're gonna like do UN sanctions or do regime change shit over it. This is that level of stuff right here. Right. Like, and it's just happening in our country, and the media is just kind of like, well, it was kind of big, but. They're not asking other Republicans, like, when they go on their TV shows to, like, comment on this or, like, get on the record. It's just kind of like a thing that's happening, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Like, the evidence is there. You know what I mean? Like, unless this is some crazy hit piece where, there's just, like, a bunch of fabricated evidence, which I just don't believe that because there's been too many different sources, a ton of documentation.
He's a Batman villain. We know this.
Yeah. And then the Tucker interview. I mean, come on. It's just...
Still my favorite interview of the year so far.
Yeah, I don't know, man, but
unbelievable.
That's all I got on Gates.
I mean, what more can we say? That'll be interesting to see. Number one, if the feds have any more, but number two, is he just going to grin and bear it and wait until he's actually indicted before he leaves, or? I don't know. It seems like he has no shame.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, he should probably just bow out now. That they might be like leaving him that room because also I was going to say just in that same context of where I was like, we would not invade other countries, but attempt regime change over things like this, or at least put pressure on other leaders in other countries for shit like this. Mm-hmm. They might be waiting for him to just resign to not have the egg on that face of America. Sure. Because he is still like a House rep. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like in the past when people have been prosecuted for like pedophilia, all kinds of other wild stuff that were in the House. It leaves a stain on America, and people like Biden don't like that shit. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, I mean, at the end of the day, he obviously has no shame, but he's probably in a safe red district wherever he is he?
Yeah. Oh, Florida. Oh, yeah. He's in what's it called? He's in northern Florida. It's just, it's wildly red. There's no, and his dad's president of the state senate. Yeah, it's.
Well, also, I think he enjoys being a, firebrand. Yeah. And how he's like sticking it to, this is it, mm-hmm. He's like building that.
He's like a purposeful troll. And like.
The GOP did turn their back on him. They were kind of distanced themselves a little bit, which, we reported in previous episodes, it was what I thought was going to be the turning point, right. But it wasn't because he seemed like he was all about being that. You know what I mean? He was in fucking executive boxes at baseball games with him and Kevin McCarthy and all that.
Right. And I think what gets lost in this all too, just for real quick, last thing I'll say is, I think we lose sight of the fact. Like, what was it? Like, it was like our second episode or third episode. Like that civil war behind the scenes is still going on between the establishment and Trump people because. Those folks like Mitch McConnell who might say things publicly that are like neutral towards Trump or whatever, you best believe that they're behind the scenes working to take out any Trump loyalist they can at any opportunity.
Right.
Same thing like Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney's not necessarily, I don't think he's like a vicious political player, but there are some people behind the scenes, folks, and donors. Because another thing that people forget is there's two branches of Republican donors too. It's Democratic donors are just kind of like all over the place and atomized.
True.
Republican donors give money and expect their fucking will to be enacted. And there are opposing camps here between the Trump folks, like the Mercers, right. And then you have like Koch establishment brother. Like Koch brother people that are like backing Mitch and shit. So there's and all these people we're talking about have their own media arms and think tanks and stuff. So
and you reminded me as well, just not to go back to go forward, but the response from the Republicans from Biden's address, they brought out Tim Scott, a black senator from South Carolina, former athlete. I didn't know. Was he a football player?
Was he? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I read that. Might be wrong. Check it out. I suppose I can. Jamie, pull that up. Oh, wait, I'm Jamie today. His response, most notably, he said that America is not a racist country. Yeah. And, that spoke to me, they brought out Tim Scott, that they are a party that is in a little bit of a crisis. You know what I mean? And this is another example of it. But yeah, I thought the response and the response that the response got in the media was expected. And also a little bit tone deaf, considering that we've watched 2 or 3 black men getting gunned down, or not just gunned down, but also choked out by the police in the last couple of weeks as well.
Yeah. They're just not living in reality. So whatever, they do what they do, man. They got their marching orders. They go out there and say what they're told to say.
Right. And I know last week's episode was something that was near and dear to me, the soccer, football as we call it. But this main topic is not going to get me as animated because it's not about my team, but it is definitely a topic that is really gathering some serious pace. This is the COVID crisis in India. As of today, there was 386,000 new cases. They're on a 7-day average right now of 357 is their 7-day rolling average right now. And a note on all that, it's largely underreported because they ran out of tests. You're dealing with people who are just dying alone in their homes, and getting it and staying in their homes. Just massive amounts of numbers. If this is not a testament to, not that anybody needed it, that the COVID crisis is real still in parts of the world, but it's a real breakdown of their health system. And this is coming from a country as well that actually manufacture a lot of the vaccine stuff.
They were the world's #1 vax manufacturer for years until last year.
Yep. And right now there's a humanitarian crisis, not to mention some of the more symbolic, striking images that you see of makeshift crematoriums and ways to honor their dead in massive amounts. It's just astonishing. And it doesn't look to be letting up either.
Right. I have like a million quotes here from scientists, people on the ground there that they're like, and you can see it when you look at the charts, guys, if you paid attention to like what America's numbers looked like. I think you named their all-time high yesterday. And by the way, that's a global record. They're breaking a global record every day now for like the last week. They're also about a little under 3,500 deaths per day. That was what they topped off at yesterday. So, and it's crazy too because I got right here. You can compare this to their April 1st numbers, which was 81,000 cases on that day and 469 deaths. So everything's multiplied by 5-fold in less than a month. That's shocking, especially since when we're considering the vaccination rate in the country, and that's just going to keep spiraling out of control because you have a decent amount of the population that's just refusing to leave their homes. But when you pair these things with, I believe that India only did about $300 billion of economic relief for the people. So what that means, folks, is like people still have to go out and make a living. You can't just like hunker down like, and remember, we talked about our India story with how much of their economy, the actual job market is farming. You can't farm from home.
Right.
You can't just log on your laptop and pick the plants and pick the potatoes.
Tough work to do.
You got to go the fuck out there. And then people have to process all that food, package it, and ship it around. So this is honestly shocking. It was interesting too because they were one of the hardest lockdown countries during their initial first wave.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think a big part of this is, and that this isn't really being talked about as much, and this is purposeful because Western media, India is a soft ally that America has been attempting to keep somewhat more under their wing,
right?
Rather than them going to China for decades now. But a ton of this falls on Modi, and no one's really saying it in Western media. A ton of policy choices and decisions that he's made, very little economic relief. A lot of he hasn't really pushed for, we'll get into it, vaccine IP publicization. From his bully pulpit and the level of leverage that he had coming into the pandemic, and considering what's going on now, it's interesting how no one's really putting any blame at his feet compared to how much we blame Trump, how much people on the right blame Biden, how much people blame Cuomo, how much people blame Boris Johnson. So it's purposeful. So just that's my little inside politic level on that there. Interesting.
Yeah. It's outstanding numbers. Not the good outstanding either. But what has been heartening, and you always see this with the crisis, is there's been numerous stories of people just going out of their way. There was one, I guess, was anecdotal, but a friend of hers who was in need of an oxygen tank. She went on WhatsApp, Facebook, and like managed to source one, drive 1,500 kilometers, and go get them. And there's instances like that happening all over India from philanthropists who live there. And just really the civil side of the country is coming together for this crisis to make sure people get oxygen tanks, are looked after. That was some of the things that stuck out to me outside of just the sheer symbolic images of the crematoriums being built, because you just know that the debt that you're dealing with right now in a country that, like we said in that episode, weighs heavily on one industry, in agriculture. And you're dealing with legacy families. And we already know the caste system in India really disproportionately disenfranchises quite a few. Yep. So, a lot of the stories you're hearing about people dying are naturally probably poor people.
Oh, absolutely. I got a quote here from Brahmar Mukherjee. He's an epidemiologist at the University of Michigan. He says, quote, "This is a complete massacre of data. From all the modeling we've done, we believe the true number of deaths is 2 to 5 times more than what is being reported." And the reason that
2 to 5 times?
2 to 5 times. Yep. He's obviously Indian, and he's an epidemiologist expert working out of Michigan doing research. And he's been targeting, focusing on India during the entire pandemic. Him and a bunch of other experts have a bunch of different reasons for it. Obviously, there's government undercounting, which that's actually some decent criticism of Modi, where a lot of these epidemiologists and organizations, global international organizations, are starting to launch those soft accusations at him, where it's like, you guys are undercounting a little bit, or at the very least they were, and they're starting to keep up and see pace. That's why you see that shocking climb so sharply. That really hasn't happened anywhere during this whole
7-day average of over a quarter of a million. It's
if you look at where they were like 35 days ago, it's literally like a straight
I saw it.
line.
I was looking at it today. And you're talking about a country with over 1 billion people.
Right.
So, there's a massive amount of death to be had still, if it's not.
Right. And and some of the speculation that him and some of the, they have sociologists, epidemiologists that were examining it, they're basically coming to the conclusion where they're speculating a little bit, but they think that, religious fundamentalism plays a big part in it, just like what we talked about with, some of the Hasidic Jews and stuff in Israel, where there's that social end of it, where
resistance.
There's a social resistance to actually, obviously conforming to what the government wants, but there's also this aspect with within Hinduism where Modi kind of played around the edges a little bit, where he made it a little bit of a religious thing around coronavirus, like a bunch of other strongmen around the world did, and people internalized that. To the point where when people have, there's a bunch of anecdotal stories, but he quotes it, this epidemiologist, where there's people who, for fear of being ostracized or viewed differently in their community, won't report that they have like a dying household member in their home. You know what I mean? So there's different things at play here. Like when you talk about Southeastern Asia and, their culture and everything, that the way that this is all, we all saw the way that China handled it, you know what I mean? And the way that they have that massive lurching power of state power they can bring to bear on things.
Get inside, close your door, we'll bring you food.
Exactly. They have a lot of cultural crossover with India, obviously being from the same continent, and not having a lot of the Anglo-Saxonal and religious concepts going on in the West. But India doesn't have that massive state power to bring to bear on things. You know what I mean? So it's really fascinating to watch, and it's horrifying. You know what I mean? Because it's like literally even the CEO of Google was on TV the other day, and he was saying this is not the worst. This is going to continue.
Yeah, no, I was looking at the numbers today, just prepping for the show, and I was like, damn. Because, it's kind of built over the last week or so that it's, there's been like a red alert on what's happening there. And thankfully, America is doing well with its vaccine rollout. So in terms of giving the vaccine and doing some exports to India, you're seeing more and more of that. You know, can it come quick enough? And just people are stretched. There's a lot of people stretched, having to deal with death, and then also, you know, reinforce themselves so they're not going to die.
Right.
And as I said, you know, normally when a disaster happens, you know, it's always the poor people that really, really suffer. I'm not saying that this is a virus that's picking who's rich and who's poor, but when we talk about resources that are available to people, you know, that's essentially who's really going to get hurt by all this. And the country itself, like, coming off the back of what we spoke about with the, you know, labor strikes, you know, Modi has really tried to shape himself in the form of a, you know, a strong man for sure. Courted the conservative side of politics over here.
Which makes sense. He would rise to the top because, you know, India, Pakistan, like, it's a very, you know, there's, it's just like with Russia, how like people like don't understand, like, how is Vladimir Putin in power? Like, sure, he rigs stuff and everything, but he has a strong base in his country because a lot of the population there understand the footing they're on with the West. India has a lot of those same dynamics at play where strong men do have a lot of support in these countries.
Yeah.
And again, this is the effect of the geopolitical pressure that we in the West wield on these countries.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a natural causation.
Well, you feel like you have to get in an axis with some, you know,
Exactly.
we saw it to an extreme in World War II, but
Right.
you feel like you have to in order to have more, you know.
Control of your own sovereignty. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, India, in terms of, you know, I guess the aggressions that they're dealing with is obviously Kashmir. But outside of that, a lot of it is around economics with them.
Sure.
Because it's such a massive economy. And for a long, long time, it was touted as the economy. Remember, I think about 10 years ago, people were really bullish on it. You know?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's super sad. And one of the things that I thought was worthy of note as well is that, like, when it comes to lockdowns, he's been apprehensive. Modi has been apprehensive in calling a countrywide lockdown, so they're leaving it up state by state.
Right.
Which, you know, some are implementing, some are not. But I think it speaks to your point about, you know, they don't want to be too restrictive of people. You know, and it all comes back down to actually relying on, you know, the science and the experts, and some of, you know, across the world, not just in India, but I feel like people have been kind of stiff-arming,
right,
you know, guidelines and recommendations. And, you know, if you know anything about the scientific process, and what happens is that, like, there is going to be some sort of trial and error with this, but you have to deal with people who've, you know, worked around epidemics before, studied pandemics.
Right.
And this is a perfect example of, you know, for example, Modi, in the places while this was still happening, the coronavirus, there was no lockdowns, not really. And Modi was campaigning in these regions. And now the data is showing that where he held these rallies of 10,000 people and where the uptick is. And again, it's no coincidence. It's a numbers game. You know, it really is a numbers game.
Not to mention there's a ton of, they have pilgrimages and things like that. Mass, right. Like, I think, I can't remember the name of it. I should have put it in my notes to give it its cultural due diligence. But they had one, like, religious pilgrimage that drew like 500,000 people within the period of 30 days. You know, stuff like that. But here's the thing though, right? Like, I agree with what you're saying. Like, obviously the government didn't have the greatest top-down approach from the science aspect of it, but I think India is the perfect example of how the choices that the global economic system forced on them, being a second world country and not having the resources to bring to bear to really do what needed to be done, even if they did make the right policy choices. You know, and I want to get into that because so right here, just real quick to kind of break down like what the science is saying on why this explosion's happening. I've got a quote here from Maria von Kerkhove. She's the World Health Organization's technical lead officer on COVID. She told reporters on April 19th, quote, "There is a variant of interest we're following, having 2 mutations, which have been seen in other variants around the world and are concerning." She added that there was a similarity with mutations that increase transmission as well as reduce neutralization, possibly stunting the ability of vaccines to curb them. India's health ministry first acknowledged the presence of this double mutant at the end of March, but has downplayed it since. The variant is known to exist in 10 countries, including Australia, Belgium, Germany, Ireland, Namibia, New Zealand, Singapore, the UK, and the US. And this, end quote. So this variant is especially alarming considering like India's high urban density. You know what I mean? I feel like this isn't something that, again, isn't really being discussed. I saw a ton of American, like CNN, MSNBC, talking about this, and they're kind of trying to frame it in this way where I think it's purposeful because I want to get into it later about, intellectual property and the effects that this has had over the long term here. Now that we're past like the 1 year point of when, the pandemic started and when the vaccine development push initially started as far as policy, not the actual manufacturing, but, I want to get into this because I think it's really interesting and I think we should give it some time. So India's 2 vaccines are Covaxin and Covishield. Covaxin's a traditional inactivated COVID-19 vaccine. So that's Johnson & Johnson, basically, that type.
mRNA?
No. It's a
one shot. Yeah.
It's 2 shots, but it's an inactivated, it's a dead version of the virus.
Gotcha.
So it's non-mRNA.
Gotcha.
It has an overall efficacy of 70%, Covaxin, but it can be over 90% when administered with a half dose or a full dose about a month later. Their other vaccine, Covishield, is derived from a replicant-deficient chimpanzee viral vector based on a weakened version of the common cold virus. So I thought that was really interesting. So remember here, folks, like this all plays into the factors of why this outbreak has happened so much. If you couple the fact that neither of the vaccines that they have in country right now are mRNA, on top of the fact that India is actually charging people to receive the vaccine. It's not free there. Another little piece that I did not see in our media, in CNN, MSNBC, found it while I was doing the research for this. So very much what you were saying, like even though the virus doesn't choose poor or rich, the vaccine is people. Yeah. Some people are, and it's not that expensive. Yep. I believe it was like 100 rupee or something like that.
Well, people are destitute.
Exactly. There's a lot of people who are hand to mouth in India.
Yeah.
A ton of the population. So the fact that they're charging people for the vaccine there is mind blowing. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to recoup money. And I guess from what quotes that I'd seen from ministry officials in India, they were basically trying to say that they wanted to have that in place so that people who could afford it, it would help support the private market.
Gotcha.
This is all through the private market. None of this is off the back of Indian, just like here in America. It's our private market supplying.
So
all
even the imports that they're getting now from humanitarian efforts from I believe the Sputnik, they've received something from.
So from everything
Russia
I read,
the US,
the Sputnik vaccine hasn't arrived yet still.
Oh, it hasn't.
So I do have something.
But are they? I presume they'll be charged.
No, I would assume that's free. You know what I mean? And the Sputnik vaccine, I actually saw the numbers on it. I didn't put it in the show notes. Great. It's like
quite effective.
It's like 91% effective. The utility as far as how cold it needs to be, how long it can be stored, are really good. And I just think, again, interesting how like Western media immediately dunked on the Russian vaccine.
Live stream, I do have to take a piss, so you're gonna have to
go ahead. I'll keep rocking it.
Keep rocking it.
I'll keep rocking it. I got some good stuff here. Okay, so like I was saying before, folks, like that threshold where you couple the fact that there's 1.3, 1.4 billion people in this country. There's a massive amount of poverty in the country, and if you're going to charge people for a vaccine, I mean that right there is like a giant hurdle. Imagine what America's numbers would be. We're leading the world right now in per capita vaccine base recipients. Imagine what that would be like if it wasn't free. Even if the threshold was only like, it's $40, $50. You know what I mean? Like that would pause a lot of people. Okay? Like the fact that we can just roll up to a mass vaccination site and, just take a shot in your arm through a window, that's huge. You know what I mean? A lot of people don't consider this, but there's a lot of people who, when they have to make a choice between like feeding their child or going to get vaccinated, you're going to feed your kid. You know what I mean? Let's just keep it super real here. And by the way, like I said, neither of those vaccines that I listed before are mRNA vaccines, which it presents a significant issue because all the data that's out on this double mutant variant that they have there, it's very similar to the South African variant, which was problematic, that appeared very strongly in the UK. There's some in the United States, which traditional vaccines like the Johnson & Johnson are not very effective against, and neither are the 2 vaccines that India has. So to transition into this next part here, we're going to have Patter fire up this clip when he comes back. In an interview with Britain's Sky News this week, Bill Gates stepped forward to white knight for vaccine intellectual property and continuing to protect the profits of these Western companies that have already profited wildly. And
Don't worry,
so I was just telling the crowd here, telling the audience that I'm gonna fire up this Bill Gates clip here.
Yes.
So he was asked in this interview, it was Britain's Sky News. He was asked if he thought it would be helpful to lift intellectual property protections on COVID-19 vaccines. So the whole premise of that question basically is, hey, Bill Gates, you're a billionaire who, for some reason, has your hand involved in basically all of global vaccine production. He has pieces of a lot of these companies. He's involved in policy making. He serves as a middleman between international organizations and the companies like Pfizer and Moderna. He's on all these boards.
And he's had quite a bit of conspiracies around.
Yeah, right. And just to give that little not caveat, but like preamble to all this, like this is all 100% facts. Like I'm about to quote him, and then I'm going to rebut what he tries to say, which is a blatant lie in this interview. But we can get into it. So again, he was asked, should IP be intellectual property rights be lifted on COVID vaccines? And his answer was no. And let's fire it up real quick.
All right, let me just fire this over.
Not. Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines.
Axis, here is his answer.
There's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. Do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. You've got to do the trials on these things, and every manufacturing process has to be looked at in a very careful way. There's all sorts of issues around intellectual property having to do with medicines, but not in terms of how quickly we've been able to ramp up the volume here. I remember how shocked people were when we said we were going to do second sources in these developing country factories. That was a novel thing. We got all the rights from the vaccine companies. They didn't hold it back. They were participating. I do a regular phone call with the pharmaceutical CEOs to make sure that work is going at full speed.
It out where he said no, releasing intellectual property rights for these vaccines will not help the global pandemic. And he says it's not as if there are capable factories just sitting around with capacity around the world.
No, not at all.
First of all, hold on. Like, before I even get to I have all the receipts here for why that's just a gigantic lie. Like, it's, again, I'll pose this. I'll be fair to him. Just like I say with, like, I've said it with Joe Manchin, a couple other people. Either he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about and he's just bullshitting on live television, speaking for the world, speaking for some of the biggest pharma companies in the world, representing them as an individual on TV, lobbying for them, essentially, defending their right to profit off of the backs of millions more deaths than need be happening so they can make more money. Companies we've already paid handsomely, that have already profited more wildly than they could have possibly imagined had an pandemic not happened. And he has the fucking nerve to come on and say there are no factories that can produce excess vaccine beyond what our capacity is right now. That's not a problem. So I have right here from the Paris Associated Press, quote, in an industrial neighborhood on the outskirts of Bangladesh's, India, by the way, ironic, on the outskirts of Bangladesh's largest city, there's Indian factories, but on the outskirts of Bangladesh's largest city lies a factory with gleaming new equipment imported from Germany. Its immaculate hallways lined with hermetically sealed rooms. It is operating at just a quarter of its capacity. It's one of the 3 factories that the Associated Press found on 3 continents whose owners say they could start producing hundreds of millions of COVID-19 vaccines on short notice if they only had the blueprints and the technical know-how. But that knowledge belongs to the large pharmaceutical companies who have produced the first 3 vaccines authorized by countries including Britain, the European Union, and the United States. That is Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. The factories are still awaiting responses. Next, as my next piece of evidence for why Bill Gates is a giant fucking liar, and arguably right now, in what he's doing with his influence and going on TV and spewing these fucking lies and saying what he just said, and what you have to understand, folks, is a ton of CEOs, world leaders, people trust this man. They think that he's some fucking angel sent from capitalist heaven to rescue us all because he fucking knows everything to do with healthcare, which we can get into it later, all of his failures on AIDS, school reform, a ton of other things. But I have here, next we have from The Guardian, quote, BioLice is a small pharmaceutical manufacturer in Canada with a simple proposition. Provide a recipe for a coronavirus vaccine, and it will produce 20 million doses for nations in the global south. It has approached AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and even asked the Canadian government to help it with compulsory licensing. So they've been lobbying Trudeau to change Canadian law to force these companies to allow them to manufacture this, okay? Which would give it the authorization to produce another company's patented product only for emergency use. That's all they're talking about here. They're not asking for them to completely remove their IP here. They're just saying for emergency use, which means in that country while it's declared a disaster. As soon as it's not declared a disaster, they will no longer be able to use that patent.
So you think the reason he's being so disingenuous about all this is but around the IP of all this, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can get into it a little later, but just let me
let
me finish this because this is amazing. It really is phenomenal. So which would give it the authorization to produce the company's patented product for emergency use, but so far no one has taken up its offer. When I reached out to him, this is the author of the article. When I reached out to him by phone this week, John Fulton, the vice president of BioLice, told me, quote, we've been passed over. We've got this production capacity, massive capacity, and it's not being put to use. If we had started this last year, we could have shipped tens of millions of doses by now. And this is a small pharma manufacturer.
Right.
This is supposed to be like a wartime effort, he says. Everyone in it together, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, to answer your question, Patter, I mean, it's all about the IP. He, in that interview, he tries to frame it as if there isn't any manufacturing capacities. Now, to be extremely charitable to him, from everything I've read so far about issues with shortages for raw materials for vaccine manufacturing, like nucleotides and peptides, I believe, are one of the main components of vaccine manufacturing, physically creating the vaccine in a factory. There are issues with supply in that. However, the problem is a ton of the small group of companies that have been awarded, because by the way, so you have companies like Pfizer and Moderna, they have contracts with a set number of manufacturers who have limited IP licenses to manufacture their vaccine, okay? Because they don't obviously own the whole chain the whole way through. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, but the issue here is those people who are licensed to manufacture these vaccines have hoarded all of the raw materials and purchased them all at exorbitant prices. Because again, we're in a supply and demand market. Because we did not choose to attack this issue from a global perspective. What we did instead was we're just going to let the free fucking market decide and dictate where raw materials to manufacture these things are. We're going to let the free market and our insane monopolistic IP laws decide who even gets to make this. And the reason that this is a giant issue is because aside from Gates's lies, right? Let's just talk about this on a base level, Patter. Let's not forget the mRNA technology that these companies are using was created by research performed by university researchers and scientists at the National Institute of Health and the Department of Defense.
Oh, that's the story as old as time.
Exactly. But
get labor to do it for you and then try to come in and steal it.
It's phenomenal. It's just insane to me because when you talk about intellectual property, guys, most of the IP that exists in this country is for something like fucking stupid, like the way that my lever turns here is like that makes it so you can't make any part of my product ever again. That's the only thing I invented. Just like right here, the actual important part of the vaccine, the mRNA, the way that the genetic sequencing works, was created by the government. They put in the work, the research. It was over a decade, right? I believe it was an immigrant who was the breakthrough, a woman, was one of the breakthrough researchers who basically understood the scientific process to make mRNA technology possible in the first place. And then you had these giant companies come along, and what they did was they took what everyone already had, anyone who's capable of doing genetic sequencing, what they did was they sequenced and took a part of the dead coronavirus, which anyone can do. Anyone can do that. That's not advanced.
Right.
And then they coupled it with mRNA technology and patented it. So all these fucking lies you hear about, they spent so much money on research, that's bullshit. What research? The fucking pandemic started a year ago. That research was already done by our tax dollars. These people, public scientists who are doing the work for the good of humankind, put in the backbreaking work over the course of a fucking decade, and now these companies come in, patent it, hoard it, monopolize it, so the rest of the world can't use it, and then you have assholes like Bill Gates go on TV and try to gaslight you into telling you you're too dumb, you don't understand why this won't work. Okay. It has to be my way.
So to play devil's advocate, he's probably donated billions that he clearly had through efforts, the Bill and Melinda Gates stuff. So my question would be then, is he just looking to get richer and richer and richer, or is he trying to stop other companies getting richer? Like I don't see his end game with this. Like surely he doesn't need any more influence and power.
I think it's ideological for him. I think because
he's coming from that world,
right? Well, the interesting correlation of this is like the polio vaccine, right? It's like the polar opposite of this. The guy who invented it, I think his quote was when he was asked about why didn't you patent it, he was like, "Well, can you patent the sun?" Like he honestly believed in his heart that it was something that who morally would even think to do something like that? Even if I could.
That's painful to me. Is that's the reality? Is that like, why is anybody trying to make money off this right now?
Exactly.
Why?
And the thing is, people forget we have the complete ability as a government that has its own fiat currency, its own ability with these countries residing inside of our borders to make them do whatever we want. The War Production Act, which this was declared a disaster. You can enact that whenever you want. I talked about this a ton last year.
Yeah, I remember.
Trump didn't do it. He never enacted the War Production Act.
And he was asked to.
He was asked
People were
to.
screaming out for it before it blew up in New York.
Biden could still do it today, and he won't. What the War Production Act does is it's like eminent domain for a company.
Yeah, you turn a factory basically into a production site for whatever you need to get done.
Yep. If you say there's a disastrous event happening in this country, you're a company that resides within these borders. You benefit from the infrastructure. You owe this country a debt where if we need, for a perfect example, FDR, during World War II, he turned car manufacturers into tank manufacturers and plane manufacturers.
Yeah. Was that the last time it was used?
That was the last time it was used on any scale that it would have been used on during the pandemic. I don't know if it's been used since. Probably during some Cold War fuckery.
And it's a federal...
only the federal government can do it. The president has to enact it.
Right.
Congress doesn't do it. It's the president. It's within executive power, which is even more insane because you could make the argument that that would never pass through Congress because Republicans are like, oh, corporations are awesome. I would never let you do that. But it's literally a president can just be like, I'm invoking the War Powers Act. This is what we're going to do.
Well, on a state level, would calling something a state of emergency would then doesn't give a state any power to do the same thing, right?
No.
Nothing at all.
State of emergency power.
Just to release funds, basically. Right?
Yeah, state of emergency power in a state gives the ability for them to do things like you can enact martial law. Like people remember Katrina.
Yeah.
You can do all kinds of things. You can break rules. You can have active military in your state. You're not supposed to have them on American soil. There's a ton of things that come along with that. But
budgetary stuff though too.
And budgetary things, sure. Yep. You can deficit spend.
Right.
And things like that. But you have to recoup it. The federal government doesn't have to give you the money back.
Right.
You know what I mean? That they just do that because it's the right thing to do for the most part.
So when this is all said and done, I mean, the next critical things to happen for India or wherever that next place might be that has to deal with this, releasing the IP of these would be massive for the world.
Absolutely.
We spoke, few episodes ago now about the dangers of vaccine nationalism in general. So whether you're talking about an individual or a country, I think, and like the guy who invented polio said, why can you patent the sun? I mean,
yeah.
And, I've heard good news last night that America has gotten to the point where they've reached that precipice now where there's quite a few people after getting vaccinated and the numbers are starting to go down.
Yeah.
Which is very, very important. Just again, it's a numbers and a math right. equation. But at the same time, we're only really as strong as our weakest link.
Sure.
So when you talk about the amount of people that are involved in a global pandemic and interconnecting
global economy.
Yep. India is the type of economy that a lot of stuff is outsourced to them labor-wise.
Yep.
So, again, we're only as strong as our weakest link. And at this point, all eyes are on India just because of the sheer numbers that they're dealing with.
Yep.
The strains, we're talking about, issues with not only people wanting to get the vaccine, but then you having people push back on, some of the data from the vaccine efficacy.
Right.
You have Bill Gates who, and I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's plenty of people who say that, Bill Gates, 5G, all that nonsense. But stuff like this doesn't help the cause for that. Right. You're instilling more and more doubt in people who are probably not going to get it anyway. So in terms of actually...
he shouldn't even be on TV
talking about this. I don't know why he's still doing that.
That's the biggest problem. We have an issue right now in our country where you have guys like him. Elon Musk is literally a co-equal partner with NASA right now.
I don't understand.
We're in this crazy place now where if you're uber wealthy and you can develop international influence, you can lean on entire arms of governments and basically force their hand because you can accelerate beyond them in technological research. Now, I don't have a problem with that if you have a benevolent person who's actually heading the company. But at the end of the day, all these guys we're talking about are rapacious capitalists. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I don't mean that in the sense that just they're greedy. I mean, it's ideological for them. They don't even consider the things that we're talking about or the benefits of what we're talking about. I mean, there's been a ton of data that I found during all this research where I referenced it before when I was saying there isn't an epidemiologist in the world who wouldn't agree with the idea of publicizing all this IP because it would kill the pandemic exponentially faster. You can't argue against that.
Right.
Now, in reference to that polio vaccine reference that I was talking about before, that's actually like a very hotly contested debate that's going on over the last few decades. I did some digging into it, right? So the capitalist position on that is they're basically trying to say, if you don't have IP, you're going to remove the incentive of a company to do the research. We've already outlaid how basically all major breakthroughs in biomedicine in the last, 80 fucking years since World War II have, the overwhelming majority of them have come from governments. Okay? Public funding and public research. Okay? Yeah. So let's just get that clear. So that's a big knock on that talking point right there. But then the next level of the capitalist argument is basically you're not going to get the capital funding and groundswell like from investors or people in the stock market to be able to propel. You're not going to have enough capital to push it out and make it at a high enough volume that it needs to be made at.
Right.
Now, here's my argument against that. If you effectively do a vaccine push and virtually eradicate a virus, the government can spend that money real quick in a deficit. Look how much money we just spent just to put money in people's pockets so they didn't starve. That was a big quote that Biden said that I actually appreciated the other night. Mm-hmm. He said something, again, I never thought I'd heard an American president say. He kept it real. He talked about the pain and the struggle of what being poor in America is, especially during what just happened. He said, I saw cars lined up for miles getting food put in their trunks. And he talked about how that bothered him. That should bother everyone. Yeah. We're the richest fucking country in the world. I don't want to see that, man. That's not right. That means there's something wrong. The system needs work. You don't have to agree that it's broken, but it certainly needs work. And here, I'll give you this argument, Republicans, or anyone who's right-wing leaning, who, thinks like, oh, these companies should make money. Okay. How about this? If we don't remove this IP, I mentioned this on a previous episode. If we don't remove these IP rights from these countries, what's going to happen is millions more people will die globally. That's guaranteed. That's not arguable. That's just science. That's math. Okay? So even if you don't care about the deaths, what's going to happen is the IP is not going to get removed. America's going to reach, I don't know what, Pat, or probably 65, 70% immunity rate. That's what they consider herd. That's what they consider. Once we reach herd immunity, our disaster is going to be declared over, okay? When that happens, Pfizer and Moderna have already said, I don't have the article pulled up here, but they've already said publicly, once the disaster is declared over in America, we are raising our prices. We're going to need to send tens of millions, hundreds of millions of doses or contribute to countries like India, South America, the continent of South America, all these other countries, and that's going to be mine and your tax dollar. You too, Republicans. Yep. It's going to be your tax dollars paying for all this shit when we could have a year ago when people like Bernie Sanders were saying this should not be allowed to be IIP'd. Mm-hmm. Imagine the amount of money we would have saved as taxpayers if we just said, no, War Powers Act, you're going to make this. We're going to make sure you profit. We're going to give you some money, but you're not going to become the next oil fucking barons off of this shit. And that's exactly what's happening. So all we're talking about here at the end of the day is spending more money so more people die, and this drags out over a longer period of time, and the global economy suffers longer.
And to bring it back to India, they were actually exporting the vaccine for a long, long time. Yep. At the start of the pandemic, and now they're, fucking trying to get more vaccine back in. It's just mismanagement, I think, is the fucking tone of coronavirus, from the start. Because, we obviously saw it at the scale here in America at the start. But globally, I listen to people from back home, it was mismanaged. And, just to, zoom out of all of it for a second, they dismantled the pandemic task force that was in place, I think, when Trump came in. But, we can't just look at it from an American standpoint. Other countries probably did have some equivalent of that and still managed to mismanage it big time. So as a global fucking society that we live in, and I bring it back to like an instance of why wouldn't you want your weakest link to be in the best possible position? For something like this, let's share the wealth in all of it. Pharmaceuticals make enough money. We have powers at play that can that can influence this greatly. And I think we talk about sanctions based off of aggressions and all this. We need to start sanctioning countries for being so fucking dumb.
Yeah.
Don't we? Like, seriously. Like, because if anything, this will slow down the global response to it all.
Sure.
Because we're having strains, all over the world. That in tandem with people trying to make money off the back of all this.
Right.
And influence and power off the back of all this,
And again, like what you're saying too, like, again, I keep repeating it. No epidemiologist would agree with what Bill Gates just said. At least not the concept of it. They might not know the nuts and bolts about what manufacturing can and can't be done, but they would completely disagree with the fact that the IP shouldn't be publicized for this simple reason. They understand how viruses work, especially this coronavirus. This has been studied probably more intensely than any fucking illness has been in a couple decades, I would argue, because the whole world studied it intensely, right?
Resources were put on it.
They understand that this is one of the most rapidly evolving, deadly viruses the world has seen. In it's got to rank in like what, the top 5? What's close to it? What, malaria? It's in the top 5. That's undeniable.
H1N1.
Yeah, but even that got squashed.
AIDS.
And there wasn't even a vaccine rollout for H1N1 in this level.
Right.
Certainly the vaccination levels didn't reach. That virus died off on its own because we didn't reach herd immunity for H1N1.
AIDS, maybe?
Well, AIDS, sure, but there's no vaccine for AIDS. But, well...
tell that to Magic Johnson.
Yeah.
Again, money.
But my point is, the fact that we took our time with this and allowed this virus to mutate multiple ways and present a different battlefield, a different battlefront in all these different regards, and it got out of control to the point where it has effectively figured out how to defeat the majority of the viruses that are on vaccines on the market.
Yeah.
There's only 2 mRNA vaccines.
Right.
There's only 2 of them. So if all these other vaccines, the CoronaVax, Corona Shield, Sinovac in China, the Russian vaccine,
Cuba
Johnson
have a
&
couple
Johnson,
too.
AstraZeneca, a ton of these traditional vaccines that don't have mRNA technology do not do well against these viruses that have these coronaviruses that mutated to perforate that style of vaccination. And we allowed that. This is a direct result of the choices that we've made as a whole globally with this IP. That is undeniable. If we would have came out of the gate and publicized this IP and told these people, you need to release this to the world, keep working on it, I don't have a crystal ball, I can't go back in time, but there's no way you can't tell me that there wouldn't be more lives saved.
No,
that's
absolutely
undeniable.
No, that is undeniable.
And that's the only goal of what this should be. It's not a fucking money-making venture.
No.
It never should have been.
Never.
It never should have been.
I mean, you look at it now, though, as well, and add into the take the vaccine aside for a sec. We talk about like the impact and how we can respond better to it. Just some of the drugs that are used to manage coronavirus too, like remdesivir. All this stuff costs money. So again, it's the people who are available to get it. I mean, you saw it to an extent with Trump, who got airlifted to Walter Reed. He got concoction of drugs right away.
Round the clock doctors.
That's not normal.
Nope.
That's not normal. So when you're looking at the scale of the amount of people that have been affected, and not to harp on the bad stuff, like I said, we can't go back in time with any of this, but we can certainly look at what went wrong and prepare for what
and learn the lesson.
What we can do better. Yeah, and it's a little bit of like what you said is that when was the last time there had to be a global response for something like this? I felt personally, and when I started hearing about COVID, probably late January of last year, February. There was a level of denial. Even when I saw Italy, it happening in Italy, there was still like, that's fine. That won't come here. And then within a fucking week, shit was shut down. People were working from home, ghosts on the streets, and the arse had fallen out of the world.
Right. Well, and part of that is it's because that's a natural human concept.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not going to happen to me, right? And then it does.
Right.
And everyone's shocked and stunned by it. But again, that's because... people don't want to,
but I'm not
use logic.
I'm not in government,
right?
And people who are getting paid to worry about these things, and not just the epidemiologists and the scientists, but also the fucking politicians that are in charge, so to speak, they don't need to be thinking like I'm thinking.
Right.
You need to be thinking what can go wrong.
Macro,
this shit is coming here.
Macro level. Yep.
Yeah, and the design or the sign of a good response to a fucking anything is being too over aggressive and nothing actually happens.
Well, or just being prepared.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like
Which the world wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
No one was.
It wasn't, and
except China.
China
was
New Zealand,
only country that. Well, New Zealand had fair warning though,
right.
because they had a very late inception point for when it happened. Because, like we said, what was it? China had it. It spread throughout Southeastern Asia a little bit. Then it blew up in Italy. Then the UK. Then it creeped into America. New Zealand, Australia, a lot of island nations had a little bit more of a head start. So let's be fair here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and again, because what we're talking about here is like, it's a massive scale of what was happening, people, because what was happening in probably this time last year, like April last year, was you started seeing a little bit of case numbers, and there were probably scientists in the ears of your Boris Johnsons, your Donald Trumps, your, Emmanuel Macrons, all these Western leaders who are telling them this is real.
Right.
You need to consider right now plans for shutting your economy down.
Yep.
And no one wanted to hear that, because you know what that spells to them? Political fucking suicide.
Yep.
Everyone in the West, because this is what capitalism breeds. And I'm not saying just all capitalism, but like this insane level of it that we've been at, it breeds short-term thinking.
Yep.
It's always about, what's my GDP this year? What are my jobs numbers this year? How can I look better for my reelection? How can my party come good out of this? We have these insane political systems built up around short-term gain and never taking any long-term approach. Look at climate change. There's no solid plan. We all keep talking, the Paris Climate Accord, that's great. Those are just fucking words. No one's doing anything. And look what we got with this. It took the world 6 months basically to actually start putting in attack plans for this shit, because lockdowns are only a temporary pause to the horrendous nature of what was happening.
Just gives you time.
Exactly. It just buys you some time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hate to just go on and on about all this, but it really is frustrating, and it all does always come back to these larger ideas that we hit on so often in this podcast, because there's all of these pressures that are leaning on our world leaders, the people who actually have the power to decide this shit. You have people like Bill Gates inserting themselves into all of this shit. Unelected, unaccountable people who have massive wealth and influence globally that are just fucking lying for the sake of, like you said, I don't think it's just for profit.
Right.
He does have investment in a ton of pharma companies and stuff like that. He sits on boards, all that, like I said. But for me, I think it's just it's an ideological thing for him. I don't think that it's like, oh, he's a greedy, whatever, ooh, I'm going to make more money. I don't think it's that. Like, the guy just puts money in an index account and he's pumping out $10 billion a year.
I mean, he doesn't need to worry about money at all.
Exactly.
Ever again. I mean, he's Bill Gates.
I think he just doesn't like the idea of the world changing out of a system that brought him such success. And he thinks, honestly, I think that people like him have like an honest like integrity around the thought of thinking like, no, this system is best because it created a person like me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I mean, that's always the
justification.
The justification for it is that it breeds competitiveness and ultimately the growth of ideas. And it's somewhat of a fair argument unless you know otherwise. When you think of what the the advancements of things like algebra and things like that didn't come. When we talk about great thinking, I feel like it's an accumulative thing, right?
Right.
One civilization teaches me one thing, then I'll be able to use. So just because capitalism was birthed out of, the necessity to go after an invention was built, and you had Industrial Revolution, which really propelled all that. Not to go off on a tangent, but we should be taking the information that we're getting from seeing this in the trial and error and all, and really making the adjustments. And we can do that as a society to critically think and pivot towards a system that works for us in the current climate.
Sure.
Like that's where I really get disenfranchised, is because we play the left versus right, we play the conservative versus socialist, all that stuff. And at the end of the day, if we did actually, learn from the past, look to the future, look at the system that we have and how it kind of operates, would be able to pivot, and everybody would literally be able to have their cake and eat it.
Right. And the thing
you can live how you want, you can be taken care of. When you think of the amount of people that are not taken care of, that's not because they're not working or trying hard. And that's the essential, fucking neon bodega sign that capitalism, has. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. That's not at play here when you talk about poverty. I'm sorry.
No.
When you're talking about poverty, especially in a capitalistic society.
Yeah, in a macro sense, having large numbers of poverty is a choice. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not just some core effect based off of human behavior. No, it's not. And the thing is, like what you were just saying, and I want to just say this to couch this, right? Like what I was saying earlier. I know I come off as like, capitalism, blah, blah, blah. Like, right? Like, no, I think in my ideal version of it is there needs to be a mix of these things. You know what I mean? Like, largely, like, obviously, Europe has its issues with corruption, all this, they have all the same shit we have here. But at the end of the day, sure, they apply capitalistic tendencies in places where it's important. I do think markets should exist. I'm not some abolish the market fucking crazy, whatever. I'm not, no personal property. I'm not a fucking communist. But at the end of the day, when you have these gigantic problems that are faced globally, you can have capitalist economies, but you can't have capitalist policy assault those issues. You need to have a different line of attack, because if you do not remove profit from being the modus operandi for the policies that you set to solve these issues like climate change and epidemics or pandemics, right, you're always gonna come out shorter on the short end because someone had to make the buck in between. It slows things down, and it's like a perfect example how I keep referencing China. China, as much as people want to call it the China's Communist Party, blah, 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 right? That's what they label themselves. China is basically, their economy is not communist. People own personal property. They're like a fucking, they're like a merchant, it's like mercantilism, but mixed with monarchy.
Well, there's nothing a while ago.
Yeah, there's nothing communist about that country. Their economic principles are inherently capitalist. Okay, well, let's keep it super real. The only difference is the capital flows from the state. It's not from individual investors. But when you're talking about on the individual level of how people live and property rights, it is capitalist, which is inherently my issue that I take with it, with extreme capitalism. That is what we're talking about here. What is the actual effect on people's lives? Right. It's not just how does money flow from the state or not from the state and into commerce. Does it come from individuals or extremely wealthy benefactors or stockholders? Sure, that on the macro level, that's different. But when you talk about an effect, the way that they put their policies in place to attack this pandemic, you can't sit here and try to say that they did it wrong. Right. You can't say that, and I'm sorry. That's just a lie. It's just a lie. Because, perfect example, they have a giant population too, just like India does. And look at the way that they're semi-capitalist, they're top-down, I would argue, like I said, monarchical, mercantilism, basically. They were able to throw money. They were able to hit the money hose at whatever issues they had. And sure, there's authoritarian aspects. But what I'm saying here is, they understood that, okay, we're going to just dump money on this problem and just level it off from the top down. America is a democracy at the end of the day. But when you have people in the executive that are unwilling to take the steps that are needed to sort of push the hand of industry, you're going to lose every time. Because me and you, Patter, we don't have the capital to push at things to solve these giant issues. Nope. We all talk about I'm going to clean up plastic. And sure, you're like, yeah, that feels great. It's good. But at the end of the day, you got some company dumping shit and fucking thousands, millions of gallons of shit every year in the water. How are you supposed to, me and you, fix that or balance that out? Right. It needs a top-down federal approach. And we just have a fucking allergy to doing anything like that in this country.
I'd agree.
And we're worse off for it.
Yep. Well, I feel like this is probably a good time to to break. Let me see. Maybe if or not break, but actually break for the day.
Oh yeah.
We're
at 1:30. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect. So this is something we're going to do a bit more, where we're live streaming, honestly, because why not? Why wouldn't we? And I think we'll do it more frequently than just the once a week. I'll pop on here. Ramon will pop on here, as you saw that he did already a couple of weeks ago. But we're going to continue to tweak the platform. We want to get more interaction on it too, which is why we're starting to stream it. But other than that, I know some of the shit we talk about is quite heavy, because it can be quite existential at times. And I do this show because I care about, and not to get like too philosophical and all that, but I do this show because I have to like talk out my thought process, because or else it'll drive me crazy. I think one of the problems that I have, and I think a lot of people who are disenfranchised by a lot of stuff that they see in the media, is that we empathize too much with the issues that people are facing on a day-to-day basis. And I care less about the things that we see and that is glorified on a day-to-day basis,
right?
From media. So like I said, a lot of this stuff can be quite heavy at times. But I think in saying that, we have to tackle these issues, and not saying that we're making a difference, but I'm saying when you're talking to others and you're talking to your kids, when you're talking to people that you interact with, try not to have that lens of what you saw, what you were told. Believe what you see in terms of the data and the numbers, and also zoom out and take a look at it from the standpoint of, okay, what is the end goal of all this? Who is really benefiting from all this? So when you talk about vaccines, you talk about IP, you talk about global economics. All of it needs to be just condensed into, who is really the ones benefiting from it. And, we see it with war. We see it with fucking peace. There's things to be built off of each of these things. And, on a day-to-day basis, I consume quite a bit of news, and, I doom scroll a bit, honestly, because the news comes that thick and fast. Mm-hmm. And I'm like a dog with a bone when I hear a breaking news story that really interests me. Right. And I'm like, okay, when is this going to develop more? When am I going to find out more? And, I think by doing a weekly show, what we're doing here now, kind of doing the research for you, talking about it ourselves, and you can see here as we interact, it's not necessarily, us having a complete thought on what we're actually talking about. You know what I mean? It's like we're talking it out. And what I want to see is, as we develop this more and more, I mean, we're new, it's 13 episodes in, but I'd like to see a bit more interaction from people coming on. I want to hear some more insights from other people. I don't claim to be some omniscient person who knows everything. Oh no. I'm not infallible, but I'm a regular dude, a father, an immigrant, someone who, puts others before myself a lot of the times. But at the same time, I care about my own well-being, because I have to think about that shit all the time. So yeah, episode 13. I was dreading this episode because it's when I have to say 13. And as an Irishman, I leave myself open to be ridiculed.
Oh, man.
Ramon is sitting here. I think the feed is frozen, but...
Oh, it froze?
It looks like it. I'm not even going to try to fix it now at this point.
Oh, shit.
But it only froze about 5 minutes ago. Oh, and it froze at me like... Look at this fucking... And it looks like we're still recording on audio.
Yeah, we got audio, baby. Back up.
So as long as we do, we're good.
Yep.
But yeah, this was fun. Still working on the the technical side of things here. And me and Ramon had our pre-production call the other day, trying to figure all this out, and we felt really old. Hats off to all the Zoomers out there who fucking have it all figured out. That's all I have to say.
Streamlabs, OBS, super wild.
Yeah, and honestly, it's probably we could cut down this process a little bit if we just knew what we were fucking doing.
We'll figure it out, folks. We're here.
Yeah, but this is all a part of the process, baby. This is raw, authentic, foreign and domestic, unfiltered.
You're here.
Unfiltered.
We're building the boat.
Yeah. And Nelson Goffram, what are you doing this weekend?
This weekend, I plan on going to the May Day March in Albany, starting at 1 p.m. at Albany.
The working man and women of the world.
That's right. Come show some solidarity, folks, with your fellow working men and women. I think there's gonna be it was already like a 500 or 400 people or something. We're gonna go. There's always a ton of people that just organically show up too. These are always.
Where are you? Let me know details afterwards, or you can give them to me now. I don't give a fuck. But I want to go too, so we should. I'll bring my camera. Plan on meeting up. We'll do some on the beat reporting.
Yeah, we can do some live coverage, man.
Bring the kids.
Talk to some folks.
Show them what the power to the people is all about.
You're gonna have DSA. There's gonna be a bunch of other leftist groups that I can't remember exactly the name.
Antifa?
I think PSL is gonna be there. You're gonna have all of us, Schenectady represent. There's gonna be a bunch of people, so we're gonna pop around, see if we can talk to some folks, just get a little feel on the ground, and get some sound bites.
Let's do it. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Like I said, we're going to be streaming a bit more, but please give us some feedback, both technical and with the substance of what we talked about. But yeah, appreciate you joining us on our 13th episode.